Hare Krishna, and welcome to the Soul Tribe podcast. I'm your host, Balaram Shakti Das. With me is my partner and co-host.
Karina, hello.
All right, so we are devoted to offering the shelter of Krishna book. So we are reading from Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And inviting you to join us in transforming our consciousness through hearing and discussing spiritual topics. So, Krishna book is a very special text. We've been covering it for some time. We're starting a new season, if you will, of the podcast. Not sure when Bhakti Jake will be able to join back up with us. But we're hoping that he can soon. Anyway, we're continuing on. We also have Dr. Brian with us today. Good to see you again, my friend.
Good to be back.
Jai. Yeah, so the basic idea of this podcast is taking shelter of Krishna. So we'll just say a few words about that. It's something that we talk about often, but we find ourselves, I think we can all relate, in disorienting times, right, in this world. And the best way that we find orientation in our life is through story, right? And it's how we relate to one another. And so Krishna is sort of the pinnacle story of the tradition of Bhakti Yoga or Vaishnavism, uh, the Indian tradition of yoga, and so forth. So, yeah, I'll keep it very brief. I'm sure we'll have more to share as we go on. Uh, Karina, is there any thoughts you want to share on what ashraya or shelter means to you?
Yeah, sure. So Ashraya is, to me, it means taking shelter. So we receive shelter, but we like open ourselves up to it and seek it out. So we're seeking out shelter in our Lord Krishna and in the holy names. It is the root of the word ashram, which is the place that monks and nuns will go to really engage and involve themselves purely in spiritual life. And it is a shelter for the soul from this crazy material world we live in. So, yeah, this podcast is meant to offer a little bit of that shelter to us and to all of you.
Yeah, I definitely find that when we do the podcast, it really kind of reels my mind in, just the simple act of hearing from these stories and discussing them. It really does transform the consciousness, um, and reorients the mind uh, with the divine. So that's the basic idea. I definitely personally need that. So yeah, that's the premise on which we started the podcast, was for us to have a format to regularly take shelter of Krishna book, of the discussion of Krishna, and offer that for anyone who wants to participate. Just got a notification my internet connection is unstable. So my internet connection is also needing to take shelter of Krishna. And we hope that it is successful in doing that. Otherwise, I can always switch to my cell phone. So we will start as we do with some invocation prayers. So These are mantras that are sort of like the sound vibration of uh, really all the personalities that bring us Krishna in this lineage. So beginning with Guru, um, various gurus, and then the holy name himself. So I will chant that first one in bolds, will repeat, and then I'll run through the rest. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Om Namo
Om
Bhagavate
Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. All right. So I think we can dive right into the text. Uh, and just give a quick recap where we're at. So we are about to start chapter 8, Vision of the Universal Form. And I believe in a recent episode, actually, um, there was another universal form seen by Mother Yashoda. Yeah, right at the end of the last paragraph. I'm sorry, the last paragraph at the last chapter. Um, Yashoda was nursing Krishna and saw the whole universe in his mouth. Um, and she's about to have that same experience again. So, yeah, for those just joining us, um, this is the story of the personality of Godhead descending in this very sweet human form. And yeah, he's still basically a baby or toddler. And the next couple chapters really are going to kind of sweep through his childhood and describe various incidents. So the last two chapters, there were two, actually, I think three pretty powerful demons that Krishna kills. So, one idea that we've explored quite a bit in this podcast is how the stories in this book, again, it's our mind is taking shelter, right? The purpose of spiritual life is to absorb consciousness, right? And right, get into that groove or that flow um, where everything just kind of falls into place, right? Versus the disorder and disorientation of a fragmented consciousness, right? When we get distracted, we get off track of the highest thing, right? Of the continual evolution and so forth of the soul towards divinity. And one way of representing those distractions is demons, right? Demonic influences that pull us off track, right? So Krishna, being the Lord, delivers us from all such negative influences. And not only does he deliver the soul, but he exchanges in very sweet ways. So, so all of that is going on. Is do either of you want to share anything else comes to mind? And we could speak at length what we've already covered in the show, but okay. Yeah.
I'm
So
ready to dive. I'm ready to dive in. Yeah.
ready to dive in. Great. Um,
Yeah.
how about Karina, would you like to start reading?
Sure. Chapter 8, Vision of the Universal Form. After this incident, Vasudeva asked his family priest, Gargamuni, to visit the place of Nanda Maharaj in order to astrologically calculate the future life of Krishna. Gargamuni was a great saintly sage who had undergone many austerities and penances and been appointed priest of the Yadu dynasty. When Gargamuni arrived at the home of Nanda Maharaj was very pleased to see him and immediately stood up with folded hands and offered his respectful obeisances. He received Gargamuni with the feeling of one who is worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He offered him a nice sitting place, and when he sat down, Nanda Maharaj offered him a warm reception. Addressing him very politely, he said, "My dear Brahmana, your appearance in a householder's place is only to enlighten. We are always engaged in household duties and are forgetting our real duty of self-realization. Your coming to our house is to give us some enlightenment about spiritual life. You have no other purpose in visiting householders. Actually, a saintly person or brahmana has no business visiting householders who are always busy in the matter of dollars and cents. The only reason saintly persons and brahmanas go to the place of a householder is to enlighten him. If it is asked, why don't the householders go to a saintly person or a brahmana for enlightenment? The answer is that householders are very poor-hearted. Generally, householders think that engaging in family affairs is their prime duty, and that self-realization or enlightenment in spiritual knowledge is secondary. Out of compassion only, saintly persons and brahmanas go to householders' homes.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, so definitely uh, some discussion around that is due. So this is pretty heavy statements, actually. So I want to get your both of your input on this. Um, so in short, what's being described here are the different classes of traditional society in old world India, namely the Brahmanas, who are the intellectual, spiritually focused, right, priestly class, and the um, Vaishya class, which is the mercantile class that Nanda Maharaj is in. Um, and then there's also the warrior and political class, which is in between those, and then the laborer class, which is beneath them in the hierarchy of the society. And you see this in every society, right? There's natural distinctions of um, proclivities for work, right? Like I was sharing with Karina just the other night, how as a truck driver, I'm totally subordinate to the um, mercantile class, like those who are working behind the desk and, handling all the logistics. Um, they don't consider the stress that they're putting on me. They only consider what is their profit, and they just maximize their profit. And it's like, oh, well, the laborers, well, they'll figure it out. Right. So, um, it's not like I can decide, oh, no, no, yeah, that's your stress about money is imposing on me, and like it should be the other way around or whatever. You know, you should be, how to say, reorienting your schedule and everything for my stress. And it's like, no, 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 you're the lower class. So like I recognize my position in that, and just like the buck has to stop here with me. And it kind of has to, because there's no lower class for me to like put it on, put my stress on. It's like I either eat it or I project it onto someone else. And so in a harmonious society, um, what the lower classes are eating in that metaphor is all very wonderful, because it's set up in such a way that the higher classes are not offloading stress onto the lower classes due to their greed and disharmonious agendas, right? They're passing down blessings, nourishment, guidance, encouragement, and the like. And so the lower classes are like, yeah, that's fine. That's great, actually. Yeah, you just want me to plug away at my work and I can have a beautiful life. Like, yeah, totally. I don't have to think about big problems. Yeah, yeah, totally. We'll handle that. But the higher classes are not handling big problems, in a way that's um resolving, right? So the lower classes have to eat those fruits, you could say. So that's a general breakdown of, how there's different, layers of society. And so in this old world um, setup, you would have what's being described here is how the Brahmana class would go visit the lower classes, namely, yeah, householders, namely Nanda Maharaj, who is a farmer, right? Well, actually, a cow herder, cowboy, right? And that it's saying the only reason is to enlighten them about spiritual life. And it's basically saying, Nanda Maharaj is basically saying, as a Vaishya, as a merchant, that we are poor-hearted, that we don't have any desire to know about spiritual life, and therefore you have to come and like give us your mercy. So it's a very, how to say, demeaning um statement. Does that make sense? So you guys want to open up the conversation around that? Just because that's, and I mean, I can say more as well. That's a big sort of thing, especially in like Hare Krishna community.
Yeah. Definitely. What I really got out of that is, in the part where like, um, kind of like it's laying out, the importance of spiritual life kind of like over family life, like how they're both important, but like you shouldn't really put your family life and like your affairs above spiritual realization, because that's like always the first and foremost thing. And it's like just reminded me of like, you know um the verse in the Bible, like, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all these things shall be added unto you. So it's like, no matter what, if you just kind of um like die, to your own desires and submit to the Lord, then everything else will just take care of itself. But that should always be, the number one priority.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just hearing the other day, Jesus's statement on the grain of wheat. right? That if you die, then, you'll bear much fruit, you'll grow into a tree, right? But if you kind of like cling to that shell of the small self, then your life is useless.
Right. Yeah.
Karina, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, well said, both of you. But in an ideal society, the upper class is handling the bigger problems, and then the lower class is content to simply focus. And also recognizing that in in this story, um, Nanda Maharaj offers Gargamuni utmost respect as if the Supreme Lord himself was appearing. So he's claiming, we're poor-hearted, but of course, the primary focus would be on raising the family. And that's not necessarily, I think, to any fault of his, because that's the main focus is to, raise Krishna conscious children, raise a godly family. Um, but, they're concerned with maintaining the household and they have to think about money. So he's offering respects to the Brahmana, and it's out of his compassion, of the Brahman's compassion only, that he shows up. And it's like from the Brahmana that this divine grace is bestowed. So he can learn about spiritual topics through his association. Um, so it's almost like, yes, the merchants are free to focus on simply raising the family, simply making money. And then the Brahmana, by his own compassion and like fulfilling his duties, he comes to the home of the mercantile class, and like is fulfilling his role by showing up and preaching in that way.
Yeah, so
So it's like
there's
both of
like a
these
symbiosis.
classes are, yeah, doing their duty.
Yeah, yeah, thank you so much, because that is um kind of the stigma that has been cultivated in large part in our ISKCON society for, good number of decades now, due to this immature interpretation of these texts, which, I mean, immature, it's like, you know, it doesn't seem like seems pretty direct what's being stated here, that householders are second class citizens, right? And that they're just not very intelligent and they should, it would be better if they were to renounce that, but because they're so greedy for dollars and cents, they're second class. So yeah, it's a big topic, and definitely I'm not able to speak to it uh, very comprehensively. Uh, but yeah, wanting to open the dialogue around that, because if we understand the essence of this text, it's Nanda Maharaj entering a mood of humility. That is how he fulfills his side of the relationship with the Brahmana, um, versus him just identifying as second class. Like you're saying, like naturally he's going to be concerning his consciousness with raising a family. The question is whether or not that is itself spiritual, or if like only the topics of self-realization and enlightenment are spiritual, right? And what is actually Nanda Maharaj saying? Because and we don't have to, like, it should be pretty obvious because Nanda Maharaj is God's dad. Like, he's raising the Supreme Lord, So if we're to take the interpretation that Gargamuni is the more spiritual person and we should all be more like Gargamuni, that would be pretty preposterous because it's like, no, Nanda Maharaj is clearly in the superior position. Um, and you could respond to that of, well, that was Krishna, but the householders now. Um, so how are you seeing that um, discussion play out? Does that make sense?
I just have to consider also the interplay today between the classes. And
Mhm.
what I've learned and what I've observed is that it requires the householders to support the brahmanas in the temple in order to free them of worldly concerns. Um, someone has to grow the grains, someone has to provide the money to keep the temple running, pay the electric bill, and do the maintenance work. So it's a very nuanced interplay of every single class of society. And in that service, in that balance, in that harmony, every single person involved is actually doing devotional service. So I don't think there's any um, you know, anything that's more or less spiritual on the surface, very much so. And it has to do with like what's the consciousness of it. So we can do things understanding that, okay, I'm supporting brahmanas and um, they are able to do their preaching work and able to pursue a spiritual life, but the householders still are working, but it's naturally understood that there is enough generosity and charity that portion of the money is given to support the temple. That's why it's like this is the ideal Vedic culture.
Wow. So it's like this story, and the interactions herein are taking for granted, we could say, or on the premise of a harmonious society, right? And it's only then that the saintly person can come to the poems only out of compassion, right? That's what it says, like only out of compassion. It did not say out of compassion and justified condescension or retributive um you know mood to chastise. Just it was like out of the goodness of his heart, and in the same way, out of the goodness of Nanda's heart, he's able to provide like unthinkable amounts of charity. So yeah, definitely um the main theme here is the symbiosis or harmony of the classes, and that the householder class, which maybe we'll break down a little bit more in a second, is that which supports all of the other classes. So it's the bedrock. And I believe that's a principle, or like a yeah, foundational principle of American society as it was founded, our founding fathers, is that the family unit is the bedrock of society. I mean, any good society, it's like that seems pretty time tested. That if you have good families, you have a good society. And if you have fractured families and unhappy families, you have that kind of society. So, um, in the world today, that actually it seems to me that that is the need of the hour, is to restore the sanctity of the family unit, right? Because we don't have this symbiosis, um, where we have brahmanas who are being fully supported in that way, and we have a harmonious interplay between all of the classes, where they're all able to look out for each other's welfare and have these kind of exchanges that are on the premise of harmony that can then express these deeper moods such as humility. And that's I'm not sure how clear that is. That's sort of like a bubbling idea for me as I've been reading this book is you can't take the literal interpretation in a sense, like meaning like what's on the surface as we're reading this book is it's going to confuse you if you don't understand like the underlying principles. For example, Krishna is God. If you don't understand that, this whole book is going to confuse you. You know, that's why
Yeah.
the context of it is in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where there's nine cantos of like 10 some thousand verses, you know, of spiritual cosmological text to give you the cosmological context of who Krishna is, so that you don't read this book and think him to be an ordinary human, because it's like he's having these very human-like exchanges, and it's like, oh, well, is that what's going on? Like, oh, Nanda just said that. Does that mean householders are totally second class? No, like we have to understand that the subtext and the context, you know. So text without context is just dogma, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so understanding the context, we we should understand that these are all people having very personal interactions, you know, and that in within the context of very deep relationships, much deeper probably than any of us know today, just because of the basis again of the society being sound as it was, that the individuals were able to have these very nuanced experiences of life. And like, how much do we experience that? Like, how many of us can say that all of our relationships are as like fruitful and harmonious, you know, and expansive as we would like them to be? Like none. Why?
Yeah.
Because there's so many problems of the mind and of economics, you know, sociology, biology, politics, like you name it, like there's disruption in every sphere of life, and that plays into our relationship. It disturbs and disrupts our relationships. Anyway, that's kind of a side point, but I think it's a nice one to make.
Definitely.
Yeah, so what can we do to restore that harmony, right? So the idea of varnashrama, and this is perhaps getting to a point, and then we can continue with the reading, is there are four varnas and four ashramas. There's four classes and four orders. And the basic idea is you pick one and you stick with it and you follow the rules of that ashram, and no one is higher than another. There's a hierarchical order to them, but when they are pursued with the aim of the perfection of life, which is to awaken love of God vis-a-vis the deepest, or as deep as you want to take it, aspiration of love, of loving, of exchanging love, of creating, co-creating a reality that is wonderful, um, then it's all on the same absolute level, because you're pursuing that which is absolute. You're not just pursuing being a householder for to enjoy on your own. Um, Nanda Maharaj is acknowledging the proclivity of householders to live in that way. And in that way, he's humbling himself by acknowledging the shortcomings of his class, which I think is very instructional, um, instructive. Anyway, um, because like personally, um, yeah, I'm very loath to admit my shortcomings and imperfections, right? And yeah, just almost like pretending like that's not there. It's like, well, that's how far can you go with that? Whereas like acknowledging like, yeah, I have a tendency to be miserly with my intelligence or with my resources or, with my time or whatever. Um, that sets the stage for you to learn, for you to like, be open to growth and evolution, because then you place yourself on the stage of cooperation, harmony, symbiosis with others. You look like you might have something to say. Oh, okay. Um, what do you think, Brian?
I mean, I've never really put a whole lot of thought into this particular topic, but I can definitely see how the way that society kind of flows, how like every single thing that we're discussing has a part to play.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it's really fascinating, and like you said, like diving into the Krishna book, having that basic understanding of the history and the people in the story is crucial, you know. And honestly, I'd like to read more and start to learn more about what we're diving into.
Mm.
I've never really read much of the Krishna book.
Yeah. Yeah, me neither. I've only read parts of it. Um, Cool.
Just wanted to comment on a point you mentioned that really stood out to me is that um, we're co-creating a reality that is wonderful. And it's like, because we're pursuing, all together, we're pursuing the ultimate end. We're pursuing the transcendental. So I really liked how you brought it together like that.
Thank you so much for pointing that out. Yeah, yeah, that is such an important point to understand. And as Brian was saying, like we all have a part to play, and it's like the most important thing is understanding who you are and what you're a part of. Right. So again, like the Ashraya, it's discovering your place in the cosmos, in a sense. And that's through the human narrative that we find that place. And it's through the sacred narrative that we come to learn that who we are is, equal in the sight of God, right? That we take these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, right? That every living entity, in fact, is part and parcel. And then, we can expand our vision, so to speak, to perceive the divine in everything, right? And you could say that that's perfection because once you see the divine in everything, once you understand that you have this common link to everything, that you're a part of everything um, living and dynamic universe, then naturally you're going to interact with life in a way that is for the highest interest of all, and that ultimately is full of wonder, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to do that. You know, if you want, but and that's, also there. It's like, you're free to choose, but um, this is the godly life, as Prabhupada translates it in the Gita. This is the way of the godly life. Um, it's up to each individual to choose. So, okay, that's nice. Nice. There's a lot there to be discussed. Um, but that felt nice. We've shared. So let me bring back
Shall
up.
we keep going?
Yeah. Okay.
Can you scroll so that like the text I'm reading is towards the top?
Yeah. Okay. Not sure where they are.
Nanda Maharaj.
Okay.
Yeah. Nanda Maharaj addressed Gargamuni as one of the great authorities in astrological science. The foretellings of astrological science, such as the occurrence of solar or lunar eclipses, are wonderful calculations. And by this particular science, a person can understand the future very clearly. Gargamuni was proficient in this knowledge. By this knowledge, one can also understand what his previous activities were that are causing him to enjoy or suffer in this life. Nanda Maharaj also addressed Gargamuni as the best of the Brahmanas. A Brahmana is one who is expert in the knowledge of the Supreme. Without the knowledge of the Supreme Absolute, one cannot be recognized as a Brahmana. The exact word used in this connection is Brahmavidam, which means those who know the Supreme very well. An expert Brahmana is able to give reformatory facilities to the subcastes, namely the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas. The Shudras observe no reformatory performances. The Brahmana is considered to be the spiritual master or priest for the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas. Nanda Maharaj happened to be a Vaishya, and he accepted Gargamuni as a first-class Brahmana. He therefore offered his two foster sons, namely Krishna and Balaram, to him to purify. Nanda stated that not only these boys, but all human beings just after birth should accept a qualified Brahmana as spiritual master.
So a few more pretty vast topics here. Um, Astrology, we have discussed in a previous episode, um, one or two episodes, I believe. Not sure if you guys want to discuss that at all. It's pretty vast and it's pretty secondary to the story here.
Well, one thing I was wondering in that on that topic was like in what way does astrology tie into like the knowledge of past lives?
Hmm. Yeah, well, you see the course of that soul, basically, because everything is moving in cycles, right? And so all the planets are,
Right.
going like that. And each planetary body is basically um the conglomeration of psychic energy, right? That's how you can think of as the planets. Um, they're not just like a bunch of, rocks smashed together. I just heard this and I shared it with a few people. This link, um, it was a clip of, what's his name? Anyway, this man was referencing C.S. Lewis and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And in that story, this boy meets a celestial being, a being who is a star, and they're in another realm. And the boy, one of the, of the same family, I believe, is, in the rest of the books. He goes, well, in our world, talking about Britain and, Earth, it's like in our world, a star is just a bunch of, gases exploding. And the being goes, even in your world, that's not what a star is, that's only what it's made of. It's so beautiful. It's like, yes, this world is full of wonder. It's like to have such a reductionist view of life. It's like, how can you think that that's all that's going on? That thing is massive. If you so tiny as you are, even what to speak of insects, their brains, like what they're able to do, it's just like phenomenal, you know. So if you think that the sun is just like, what is it, helium and hydrogen or whatever, it's if you think it's just like a couple basic elements, and it just happens to be really big. Okay. No, there's so much going on. So it's the conglomeration of psychic energy, and it's on a higher plane, those energies play out in a way that allows for a very harmonious evolution of the souls in the realm of the material universe. And every universe is more or less um, based like the same structure, because that's just like the structure of life. Um, and so on the physical plane, then, we play out these lives, but they're very much governed by the passage of the stars. Um, and you just kind of have to take that, you know, as it is. It's not to say that it sounds very deterministic. Um, it's not, because you have a choice of how you interact with those forces, and that changes your trajectory. Um, but you can see the trajectory very clearly. And so the past lives, it's just like if you're looking at a design, it's like, pattern recognition, right? Like if you want to judge the psychological development of a small child, you can give him different like math problems for him to solve, like sequence problems, right? So like 0, 2, 4, 6, blank. It's like 8, and at a certain age, he'll be able to do that, he or she. And before that age, they won't be able to, they don't have the wiring to do that yet. So that's a very simple neurological wiring, but the Brahmanas have a very advanced, very refined wiring of consciousness. They can understand very fine patterns, and those are expressed in the stars. So it's a science. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense considering that like after you've lived so many lives and you receive an incarnation as a brahmana, your perception of life is completely different than, somebody's perception if you're just born as like a not a servant. Well, 'cause, I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, because servants are can also be very spiritually advanced in their own way, but just somebody that has like a low birth per se, like they perceive life very much just like
Nuts and bolts.
as it is physically, you know. Yeah, it's just very very much simple. Basically, they use logic to interpret everything, whereas like a brahmana can merge logic with spiritual perception and just literally can comprehend things as they actually are, basically, to the extent that a human brain can process it, basically at the same level that we were created to perceive it, like through the Lord. So it does make sense, when you put it on in those terms.
Yeah. Yeah, we all have different lenses of perception, you could say. Um, and there are veritable patterns within nature that you can see in those different ways. Um, so, you know, what for like a merchant, he might see a field and see dollar signs, see ways to
Mm-hmm.
make money. Whereas, someone else would see that and they would think of, the wildlife and so forth and the different things to study within that. So they're seeing the same thing, but different lenses. And the brain accommodates all that. Yeah,
Right.
very, very interesting stuff. Um, okay, the
Hmm.
second, yeah, the second paragraph we read here, um, also very interesting, talking about reformatory um, facilities. So this is another huge topic, but definitely want to discuss a little bit about it while we have time. So again, the different classes are named here: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and then does it say Shudra? Does not say. Yeah, the Shudras observe no reformatory performances. So yeah, again, this is like getting on the topic of like the caste system. Um, yeah, subcastes. So, and like whether that is like a thing about the people being less than um or like what the actual essence of this is. Do either of you want to share your thoughts on what was being spoken here? It's like, I mean, if someone with no understanding of Vedic culture, which is pretty much all of us, okay, were to read this, they'd think, oh, like that's ridiculous. Like, why would these classes? And like, first of all, like, the understanding of what these reformatory processes are is important, and then why they're given, you know, is can be understood. Any thoughts?
I have some thoughts. I'm just trying to be careful with my words because I don't want to like say anything that could be degrading. Um, but in my understanding, maybe um, the upper classes might have the means to purchase the different ingredients that are necessary for um, the reformatory facilities. I'm imagining that maybe it's in the form of a fire sacrifice, and in that age, in that yuga, that was the main practice. Was they had like very detailed rituals with very specific ingredients, and sometimes metals. Certain metals could be expensive, and then they would gather these ingredients, and then the Brahmana would come and they would do these fire sacrifices. You know, it's like a ritual, and then the Brahmana would have the correct words to say. So maybe something is not going well in business, or you know, um, maybe a daughter wants to get married or something like that, and so that they would do these things to influence. And then maybe, yeah, sutras might just simply not have the facilities to do that. What do you think?
Well, that doesn't sound very just. Why can't there be equality among the classes? No, like that's the question, right? Like, why isn't there social equality? So the basic point with that is, everyone is created equal and everyone is not created equal. Meaning, uh, and yeah, I'm not going to try to not step on toes because that's not possible really with this conversation. Um, but hopefully some clarity around these ideas. Again, context is very important. So, we're all qualitatively equal as spiritual beings, but quantitatively, in terms of our material or physical faculties, we're all very unique. And our uniqueness can be um, taxologized, you could say, or like uh, categorized in very discrete categories. Whether or not we like that, our society right now, and this is, yeah, way too big of a conversation. Um, but yeah, if it comes up in the future, that's fine. Is this, you know, class wars are going on where the whole concept of whether or not there are distinct classes or categories, is being argued, in terms of gender, that there are no set, you know, categories of that. And it's like, well, if you take that path, it leads to nihilism. And that is an experiment that has never worked. You can run it, you can try to live in that way, and it just doesn't work. Why? Because there's a purpose to everything. And so Krishna is stating it's like you can either come to this understanding um, inductively or deductively, meaning you can just study life and realize, yeah, there's distinct categories. Or hearing, Krishna says in the Gita, Chatur um, Vidam Maya Shreshtam, I believe it's the Sanskrit, that from me come the four classes, that there are four categories um, that people naturally will configure into, and that there are different paths for these different people. And no one is higher or lower than another. And that's where we get into problems when we start saying, oh, well, I don't like that this class is getting different treatment from me. Therefore, in order to have social justice, we have to focus more on the differences in the name of like equality, which if you think about it, it's like that doesn't really make sense. It's like, why are you making such a big deal out of race or gender or whatever? Because that's not who you really are. But by you asking or forcing everyone to consider that, you're making everyone racist. Like, I mean, that's my conservative opinion coming out there. Um, but hopefully that makes sense. It's like um, we can also act on the premise that everyone is equal um, spiritually, and that only comes about when we have this um, harmonious interaction between different classes, because it's it's giving the premise that there, anyway, this is kind of a stretch, but I know there's a connection there um, with inherent meaning, that um, the world is not arbitrarily assigned meaning, right? And that is what the far left is asserting, that gender is assigned at birth in a practically arbitrary way, that classes are assigned by people in power in an arbitrary way. And that's not true. It's not arbitrary. There is, because again, if you take that thought to its conclusion, it means like all meaning is arbitrary. It's just whatever you assign it to. And it's like if I believe that I'm a unicorn, then that's what's true. And it's like, well, what's a unicorn? Well, it's like it's whatever I want it to be. It's like, well, that's circular logic. It's like You don't see circular logic here. So it's like you at some point you have to define what a thing is, and how you do that is what the meaning is, and how you have meaning is the narrative, right, that it fits into. So there is a narrative being given here of these different classes, right, and that each has a role to fulfill. And so it's not that the Shudra is lower, it's just that they don't have the same role that these other classes have, which is to guide society, which is to be in a position of higher responsibility. And that is also very tied into this whole discussion is the idea of natural rights and natural law, as John Locke, one of our founding fathers, stressed. And that was the whole ethos of that, of the founding fathers and of all prosperous societies is everyone has natural rights. Yes, also everyone has natural responsibilities. That the more that your society gives you, rights, the more responsibility you have to that society. It's not just take, 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 take. It's also give, 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 give. You know, so if you want your rights, right? Um, but our current postmodern society is saying to hell with my responsibilities. I am entitled, to assign whatever meaning I want to my life. And you can't impose, a certain meaning or a certain narrative because that's, patriarchal or whatever. It's like, okay, well, that's not going to get you very far because if you discount responsibility completely and just make it by your whim, that you, it's not going to bear good fruits. And we learn that through these narratives of religious texts that good fruit of human society is born from taking responsibility and sacrificing. So the reformatory performances, as Prabhupada is translating here, which is basically initiation, particularly its male initiation, which can raise a whole nother, you know, slew of debate. But um, traditionally, it's male initiation because the men are, it's not because they're higher or better or more important. It's actually the women are more important, separate conversation. But it's the males who are given the rod of responsibility to sacrifice, because men are expendable. Let's be honest. Men are expendable. Women are valuable. They connect us with life, with the divine, you know. Um, yeah. So reformatory processes are initiating the individuals, men and women, um, but initiating them into a higher order of responsibility, which is meant for these higher classes. Um, but we understand as well from the teachings of Srila Prabhupada that these classes are not set in stone by your birth, and you should not consider someone by their birth or by the color of their skin and so forth, but by their qualities. So if you have the qualities of a Brahmana, you should be initiated as a Brahmana because that's how you follow the course of your destiny. And Gargamuni is able to see that. He understands Krishna and Balaram, um, as the example of the text here. Uh, but yeah, an expert Brahma, someone who's Brahma Vidam, which means they who know the supreme very well. They understands, you know, the course of of a particular soul, and they can guide them how to reform their life, meaning how to initiate their destiny, how to, begin, how to step forward, you know, towards the goal of life. Okay, that was a lot. Apologize for that. Please stop the share. Okay. comments, qualms, questions, discussion?
Yeah, so when it comes to determining like your class, like your dharma kind of, like what, like how do you go about doing that, you know?
Yeah. Well, you have to know yourself, right?
Right.
Um, so coming to self-knowledge, is a process of inquiry, contemplation, and all of that. So, I mean, that's a little, how to say, cliche to just say, look within, um, but also associating with people who are in knowledge, you know, because that will give you some pretty clear reflection on the nature of human beings. And then yeah, hearing these stories again, how we learn our place in the cosmos is through story. So that's really like the central idea that I would offer in that regard is you need to have um a myth, a mythic account of your humanity. It's Richard Rohr says, what you do not mythologize, you pathologize. So if you don't understand the dynamics of the story that you find yourself in as a human being, it will become pathological. You won't know how to resolve that aspect of yourself. So understand, yeah, Karina. So understanding your, um, like seeing the world through the lens of narrative will give you very strong indications of like, oh, like, right, like you watch a movie, it's like I identify with that character. That's your class. And we all identify with the
Uh,
hero, right? But also like we should see like, the underlying aspects of these stories and be like, oh yeah, that's like me. Yeah, Karina.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out from the conclusion of the paragraph we're reading, um, the importance of taking a guru or a mentor. And here it says from birth.
Mm,
So to have someone who is in the Brahmin class who can see your natural tendencies, it's difficult to see ourselves sometimes. So yes, self-knowledge is a thing, um, essential, but it's also easy to delude oneself. And to have a mentor who can see you clearly and help to guide your faculties and your skills, your natural inborn skills, is invaluable. Yeah, just to give us so much clarity and to encourage us. Like if you have a certain skill, the mentor is there to say, wow, look, you can do this quite easily. Did you notice like
mm.
how much more easily you can do this than others? You can use this in Krishna service.
And even, but yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Such an important point. Um, from birth, because even before the age at which you could have such a conversation, they are setting you up for success, right? Which is, yeah, it's essential if we want to. And it's again, it's not like, very literal, like fanatical interpretation. Oh, like we have to, give guru to, it's like these are principles, for us to understand because it's like we can't change the fact that we weren't brought up with a guru. Um, but we should understand like, yeah, we've had a lot of um how to say setbacks or what there's a lot of confusion um when you don't have that very clear track of life um to start with. Yeah,
Also, another reason why astrology is wonderful because it can reveal things that are natural inclinations that may not have had the opportunity to be explored. I know personally, I have a lot of skills and traits that astrologers have said, actually, you'd be really good at this. And I thought to myself, wow, I always thought that, but I never actually took the opportunity to develop that. So that's a huge tool, useful tool.
Yeah, I feel like I have when I really, you know, look at my life, that I've definitely had moments where like I can make certain connections that allow me to sort of just feel in my heart like what path I'm supposed to follow. Like what comes most naturally to me. Um I mean, there are times when like there's some one time I just kind of sat down and I like did some like process some of elimination of like different classes that I could be in. And I just thought like, well, I'm not very good at math. I'm not very good at like selling things. I'm probably not like a merchant, you know? And I thought at sometimes that like I might have been like a warrior because I always sort of like identify with that, but then I realized I've never been good at fighting. I definitely care a lot more about like peace than violence, and I also
Yeah.
just like couldn't really see myself fighting
Yeah.
um for any reason. So I just kind of figured, my path must be more like on the spiritual side of life, not more of like a worldly side. So yeah, that's just what I kind of thought of from that conversation.
Yeah. There's some people that also say, in this age, it's different because things aren't black and white so much because everything is all mixed, you know. Um, so instead of having like thoroughbred classes, let's say, there's a lot of like blendedness. And so our natures are confused in a sense. And so there's a lot of like sorting out with that. And it's like my message and perhaps kind of like bottom line um with this, if I did not just lose my train of thought. um but okay, yeah, it's basically like to not take these matters so rigidly, so like everything that we've discussed and the things that I've spoken, um there's one side of all this, and again, like I think I was pointing this out earlier, but um there's a very literal sense about all these things, and then there's a more esoteric side of all these things, which, the essence of it really is about cultivating love, right? And having those more refined exchanges with other souls through God, through spiritual consciousness, right? And that is the goal, and to not lose the forest for the trees, right? That's really what I want to be sharing with this. It's not like you must understand this tree, like this is everything, this is everything. There are very definite. It's like, well, yeah, there is a science, and it's helpful to understand that. It can be helpful. It can also be detrimental, to get caught up in details. Like, am I this class or am I that class? Um, it's like, yeah, you certainly carry the characteristics of a class, perhaps multiple classes. In another sense, we're all not even on the Shudra category. You could think of it like that. Like none of us are even on the chart here, because of how, you know, mixed up and fragmented our society is. It's like, which is to say that these classes only function in the way that they're described when the whole society is in harmony, as we were discussing earlier on, right? So if it's not the case that all these classes are working in harmony, then what is the point of even using the model as such, as like a reference point? Like it has to be like, it's not going to fit into that mold anymore. So you can't apply the same principles or you can't apply the same details. You have to apply the principles to the time, place, and circumstance of the current culture and move from here. Don't get fixated. And so that is, again, like I think that's my bottom line. And that's my real understanding of spiritual life is don't get fixated. The principles of scripture and so forth of spiritual life are going to point out to you what your fixations are. It's not so that you can double down into, pigeonholing yourself or others. It's like you are a suitor, you are a man, you're a woman, you're a, white person, whatever. It's not to pigeonhole, it's to understand that's your fixation. You know, that's what you have to work on, to work with, you know. Why? Not to just like be fixated on it, but to use it as a vehicle for love, right? That's that's really where it's at. Jai. Any closing?
Jai, well said. I think you wrapped it up really nicely there. It's a good mic drop moment.
Okay.
Want to close here?
Yeah, let's close here. So we'll close as we always do, thrice chanting the Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna, Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Krishna
Hare,
Krishna,
Hare
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 Rama,
Hare
Hare,
Hare Rama, Rama
Hare
Rama,
Rama,
Hare
Hare
Hare,
Rama,
Hare
Rama
Hare,
Rama,
Hare Hare
Krishna
Krishna
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Hare,
Krishna
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna
Hare
Rama,
Hare,
Krishna
Hare
Hare
Rama, Hare
Rama
Rama,
Rama,
Rama Rama, Hare
Hare
Hare,
Rama
Krishna, Hare
Rama
Krishna,
Hare
Krishna
Hare Krishna,
Krishna, Hare
Krishna
Hare,
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna
Hare
Hare
Krishna
Hare,
Hare
Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Hare
Rama Rama.
Rama Hare Hare.
All right. Thank you all so much. See you.
Thank you guys, really.
Yeah, thank you. Expanding conversation. Love seeing you. Um, we'll keep the WhatsApp group posted with the schedule because we have the holidays coming up, but we should be good anyway. Um, we'll just we'll see you when we see you. Haribo.
Sounds good.
Very
Bye.
well. Thank you so much.